Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Kuker-Ranken's Lunch and Learn. We've got a great subject today. We're going to be working with the Office to Field workflow with Revit to Infinity to Captivate, hosted by Mack Kowalski out of our Tacoma and Montlake Terrace stores. Mack, I'm going to hand it right over to you. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you guys for coming. This is, you might be kind of wondering why the guy that always is talking about scanning is talking about Revit to Captivate. We're going to go over a workflow that I developed that is still in use by a company in several states, over about 15 or so crews. At one point, I was able to, or you'll be able to, if you follow this workflow, do this in under a minute and get this out to the field. So it is a pretty effective workflow for getting something through Revit, Infinity, and Captivate. There are many ways to skin this cat. This is just what the people that I have worked with have found to be rather effective. So we'll get right into it. We're going to start with a model that was generously donated to us by the Conco companies. So this project is it's a high rise. It's a couple of floors down below ground and a couple, 14 or so up level. So 32 floors above ground. But typically you'll see this when you first open it up, depending on the size. This one's the bottom level. What this workflow entails is changing your coordinate system at this point. The reason you do this is when I go to export an IFC or DWG or anything I want to export from here, it will then be on that coordinate system. In this workflow, you should go to, sorry, I didn't see that down there. You should come to the project or manage and come to coordinates, specify coordinates at a point, select the bottom left coordinate. We are lucky on this one that there is a column right there. Revit will not allow you to assign a coordinate at a grid line intersection point unless there's something there, a wall corner, a center of column. If I zoom way in, you can see it right there, that blue dot. I zoom out. I want to make sure I zoom out to see the dimensions, the 3'10" and 7'10". Now, we have already done this prior to this, but if we hadn't, it would say 0 or 3 feet 10 inches, 7 feet 10 inches. We have already moved it to a 1,000, 3,000. The reason you would want to do this is so you don't go into negatives. If you go into negatives and the guy in the field has to hand calc a point, he very well could go in the wrong direction because he's adding and he's actually should be subtracting because it's in the negatives. You might be asking yourself why we don't go ahead and put it on state plane here. Revit does not like state plane. Anything over 13 miles from 0, will start to cause you issues. A user coordinate system is much safer, and you can then orient everything, which we will do as a group here in a minute, to this user coordinate system. Makes it much easier on the guys in the field. They don't have to think about magnetic north and the angle that the architect drew the building, as long as we keep it in due north. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. Now, one of the reasons we have decided to do it this way is because it doesn't actually change the coordinates of the job. Meaning when the detailer comes back in, it'll still be on the 0, that he drew it in, and you're not gonna mess with their workflow at all if you choose to save it in the same spot they save it in. Before we move forward with this, I will go ahead and we will go into the 3D, and we want to export an IFC. So you go to File, Export, go down to IFC, select it. We don't change anything in here, except for we will go into Modify, and we want to split walls, columns, and ducts by level. What that does is it allows us to, in Captivate, turn off all the floors that we don't want to see or all the columns or whatever we don't want to see, we can separate out by floor. It makes it just another level of visualization that is really handy to have in the field. I'm going to cancel because we've already done this. Then we want to come back to P4 and we go ahead and file again, export, and pick our CAD format. Now we can export a DXF or a DWG. The difference between those, what I always tell people is the DWG is AutoCAD specific. AutoDesk specific. So it's meant for AutoCAD, Revit. Now it can be used in programs they've adopted to it. DXF is universal. It's made for any CAD format out there, should accept a DXF. We usually select a DWG just because we're used to it. Now there is we have some saved ones that they have created for us. The only difference between really the survey export that we have saved and other ones is this right here, the units and coordinates. A lot of CAD detailers, they will have it set to export in inches because it is easier to draw in CAD in inches. And then what we changed earlier was our shared coordinates. If we leave it on internal origin, when we export it, it will be at a 0, 0. And then later on, our control could possibly be in the negative. So you want to make sure that you have shared coordinates and switch it to foot. Hit OK here. And then you would hit next. You would choose your spot. We already have it saved. So we will cancel this out. But then you just hit OK one more time and it will export it. Now, those of us that are familiar with Revit know that starting in 2019, I believe, they started exporting certain things like columns and stuff as blocks. So what you will want to do, and we're not going to go over here, is bring that into AutoCAD and explode all. Select it all, explode all, and that will create individual lines instead of blocks. It's a pretty simple procedure, so we're not going to go into it here. All right. Now we are done in Revit. We have now exported an IFC and a DXF. The reason I like to go into Infinity is because if we go into Infinity, we can then create a single file unit and export that, send that out to them rather than them having to export or import a DXF and an ASCII and then an IFC. If we bring it into Infinity, we have a lot more control as what we send them is a lot more small. It's a lot smaller of a file. It's a single file and you can email it. So from here, we will close this and open Infinity. Now, what we have in here is the DXF that we exported. We went ahead before this and we turned off in our layers, we turned off our dimensions and stuff like that. We don't want to see that. We definitely don't want to copy it. And then we went ahead and we created a couple of grid line intersection points. And the reason we did that is because we have a control file from the surveyors that we also brought in. Right here on the left-hand side is called, if I zoom extents, you can see that we have our control file over here. In our control file, we have the monuments that are outside of our movement area, and we have our grid line intersection points. If we go into our inspector and we look, we have in the code, we have the label for each grid line inspection point. So I'm going to go back to view here. What you want to do is you want to hold shift and select what you want to move. Under your home tab, go to shift, rotate, scale, select it. You want to select using common points. This is the way we prefer to do it. This you can play with. 5 is fine for moving points. Hit next. Now, on your left-hand side is what you want to move. On your right-hand side is where you want to move it to. This is very important to remember. Left is moving, right is where you want to move to. I kind of wrote down already what we're going to move, but if you forgot to write it down, you should have your codes. Oh, I must have that turned off. I apologize. but it's always good to write down what you want to move before you start it in case that happens. So we will select 101 and we're going to look for A1. Now we have two A1s here. We have A1, and that's the one that was imported. Oh, no, we don't. I'm sorry. We have an A1 and A10. I'm going blind, apparently. Apologize about that. We'll select that. And since we already have A10 showing over here, let's find A10 over here, which I believe is 132. Now, you could actually perform this with just these 2 points. It is not recommended, and we'll see why in a second. If I go 121 and look for M, we now have 121 here and M10. If I bring that down, we now have a 3-point and we have really good residuals. Now we have a 4th one, but I don't really see a reason to. If you had bad residuals at this point, then you would add a couple more. You can change at this point whether you want to use them for position, height, or position and height. So if you have one that has really bad position but really good height, you can get rid of it, or you can just change it to height and then move forward. So let's go ahead and hit next. Here it's going to tell us how far it's shifting everything. There is one that it is shifting 129 feet in height, and that shouldn't happen. Generally speaking, all of my control points, the 132s and the ones I created, they were all at 0 for height. So it shouldn't change the height. We definitely don't want to change the monument heights, right? So that is something we want to go back and verify later. Oh, I'm sorry. These are the heights that they're at. These are the heights they're going to change. So they're moving, these are the state plane coordinates that they're shifting. And they're all shifting at 0 degrees height. So that's good. You can print a report to show what you did in case you ever want to go back to it. We generally turn that off. If I hit finish, it'll think for a second. Now if we double click on our wheel in the center of our mouse, we now have our control around our DXF that we brought in. All nice and neat. The reason we like to do it this way is it takes human error out of it. We bring an ASCII in. We're not hand typing northing, easting elevations. We're not moving points generally. We are moving known points to known points. The way that works out really well is unless someone made a mistake when they put the grids in, it should just align perfectly, which it did. We saw we didn't even have 1,000th error on this transformation, which is really, really good. Now comes a little bit harder part. Not really, it just takes a little more thought. And this is where you will have to come up with your own naming system. We know that this is, let me move this over real quick, P4 or foundation. So we would name it either one of those. And what I mean by that, let me exit this. If we go to features, copy settings, it will automatically go reference point and reference point, or reference line. We want to change those because we don't want every point in here to be called reference point 1, reference point 2, reference point 3. For the first one, we like to go foundation, FDM, dash. So then now it's going to be foundation 1, foundation 2, foundation 3. And that makes it nicer. If you ever import other points, you'll know if they're not on foundation because they will be called P3, P2, level 1, level 2, dash, whatever. Now, if we type this in and we just hit, this is in my way. So you guys can't see this, but the zoom thing is in my way. If we just hit lines right now, watch what happens. If we go back to points, it didn't save it. So FND dash, and if you hit tab, it will move to the next one. Now, if we go to lines and go back, it stayed. It's a weird little thing. It's been there since BIM first started in this program. I don't know why it's never been fixed, but just be aware that if you do that and don't tab or click off something else, it won't save it. Same thing with lines. If we go F and D dash, and we just go back to points and go back to lines, doesn't save it. F and D dash, tab. Now, we're going to go ahead and lasso everything and hit all. It's going to think for a second. Now we have points and lines for everything. Why do we do that? If we don't copy this, when we export this project, nothing will show up. We have to copy it. Leica wants to make their own points and their own lines for everything. They will then bring that in. That's why it's so much smaller, the DBX, because it's not bringing in the DXF line work and data, which is much larger than the Leica's version. Now, I know, I realize that I have been throwing out DBX and DXF, and they're very similar. So DBX is the Infinity Leica Captivate native format. It will, right now, when we export this as a DBX, line work points, if we were bringing an IFC into this, it would all come out with that. We'd have to copy the IFC. Generally, we want to bring the IFC into the project after it's into Captivate. So now we have, if you notice here, all of our control, which looks good, it's actual elevation. All of our points are down at 0. One of the things that is a little odd, but it works for Leica, is they put a point at the end of every line they create. So if you notice at this corner here, there's 2, because there's a line and there's a line. At this one, there's several, because there's a line here and there's a line there and there's a line there. So just know that when you bring this in, if you select that, all these points are at the same northing and easting. 0.33, 0.42. Oh, I selected a line. 0.33, 0.42. So they're all, we get that question a lot when someone sees it in the field. They're like, well, which point do I select? And you just have to let them know that they're all on the same point. Go ahead and select any of them. From here, all we need to do is go to Home, Export, All. Make sure DBX is selected down here. Now, this is where you can choose to select your ASCIIs, your land XMLs, whatever you want. But if you're going into Captivate, the best one is DBX. This is new. I'm going to have to check this one out. But the DBX, and then we hit Export. Now, let's go into, and actually, we're not going to go actually into Captivate on this one. The simulator I have is not performing well on my computer, and it would be futile. I will, however, talk you through, if you were to import an ASCII and then a DXF, you run the chance of importing it XY instead of YX, or importing it in meters instead of feet. When you bring in a DBX, you will go to Settings, Tools, Transfer User Objects. Make sure that the from USB is selected. Pick the job, make sure job is selected, and then hit transfer. What it will do is it will bring that over, whatever units that you did in here, it will bring in whatever format, whether it's northing, easting, northing, you did in here in Infinity, it will bring it directly in. So you don't have to worry about scaling. You don't have to worry about international feet. You don't have to worry about meters or any of that other stuff. It's a lot more foolproof for your guys in the field. You're now at a 1,000, 3,000 that they're not in the negatives. They don't have to think about that. They can stake everything relative because everything's north, south, east, west. It's a lot less thought for the guys in the field. There's a little more thought for you in the office. One of the things you will do with that IFC is bring it into, you will select the job that you just transferred from your top carousel Captivate, and you will hit view and edit data and add your IFC then at that point. The reason we like to do it that way is an IFC can really bog down certain controllers, but if you attach it instead of import it, you can then select the points that you want to, just the ones that you want to do, not all of them, and it won't bog you down and make your program run really slow. And with that, we're at 21 minutes. Do we have questions?
Mac, it's Rob. I have a question.
Yeah.
Lots of information here. Just some clarification. So we're talking about 3 programs: Revit, getting it out of Revit, and the issues are not issues, but things we have to be aware of as coordinate system, right? In Revit, local coordinate systems, and some things to be aware of. Some tips you were talking about. Second thing, it goes into Infinity. So the program, Infinity program. And I saw a lot of cool things I didn't even know, where selecting tool, the selection was kind of some things to be aware of, right? Select all, export a DBX, be aware of that scale transformation, rotate scale transformation program. And then the third is Captivate, right? 3. So it's 3, you just went through 3 systems pretty quickly. How often were you doing that, and how often is this? First question, I know it's a lot. There's a lot of information here. Floor by floor, did you have an individual FND1, FND2? Was a coordinate system for each floor, or was it one coordinate system? I guess that's one big question for me.
So there are many ways to skin that cat.
Right.
The way I like to do it and kept it organized for my crews was every floor they would get a new job. And first one was called Foundation. The second one was called P4 or P3 or whatever level it was. Every job had a different level on it.
Because there's so much. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing about the IFC is you can use it for a floor or two, but generally buildings change by the week. So you would have to send a new IFC too.
Got it. Yeah, that was the other question I had, is the flexibility of that. You if you know what you're doing, you could run through it in a couple minutes. But as things are revised and changed as you go up, it's not that hard to manage that. Delete that old job, here comes the new one, type of thing, right?
Yes. And once you do that rotation of the control that's on state plane, you don't have to do that anymore. You export that for your own use. And every time you do a new one, you just import your points that are already on your coordinate system. So it becomes, you could ship it out in less than 60 seconds. I've timed it before, and it was from exporting from Revit to exporting the DBX from Infinity to send to email to someone. It was 60 seconds.
Okay. And I don't want to take all the time on the questions, but I got point cloud data into, does IFC take point cloud data? What's the relationship with point cloud data? Just curious. Is there any?
No, an IFC is just the family types that is easy for survey software to use in the field. It's a way to bring not a full model in, basically. It really has nothing to do with point clouds.
Okay.
Generally, point clouds don't go from the office to the field. They kind of go the opposite direction.
So let me ask you this then, follow up. The last question is, in Revit, is there, I mean, this is not an upsell, but is there CloudWorks for Revit? And what is that? That's point cloud data. So what's the relationship there with Revit?
Well, there's CloudWorks for a lot of programs. That would be another lunch and learn.
Okay, there you go. Great answer. Okay, that's all I got for now. Thank you.
All right. Well.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our time, and we doesn't look like we have any questions from our audience, but we want to thank everyone who joined us for today's Lunch and Learn, and we look forward to seeing you next week as we start going through best mapping practices for unmanned aerial aircraft. And Mack, can you please throw up the roadshow slide there again? That'd be great. We've also got our Kuker-Ranken roadshow that we want to remind you about. As our Kuker-Ranken Roadshow is coming around to several different cities across the area. You'll see those here as soon as Mac throws that back up.
Well, there it is.
Excellent, thank you. So folks, you can see this is our robotics roadshow. We'll be traveling around with robotics for both air, land, and sea. So you'll see a variety of different types of robotics products on the roadshow beginning on October 3rd in our Seattle store, working its way down to Fullerton, California, across Idaho, Utah, Nevada, and Oregon. So we look forward to seeing you out there. We want to thank Mac for taking the time to be with us today and share his knowledge and the workflow that he's created. And we'll look forward to seeing you folks next week at our Roy Davis's drone mapping best practices event. And then on August 24th, we'll be announcing a new aircraft that we're sure everyone will be excited to see. So until next time, we'll see you next week. And again, thank you for joining our luncheon. Take care.